Hi. I'm going to take you on a walk again. I've been getting more phone calls, more emails, more Facebook messages, more everything than at any other time in my life. It seems that this movement to reform or abolish the police has gone farther than it ever has before. This move, not only to emancipate black people and redress these historic injustices, but it seems a general movement of the people to understand their own power, something I've never seen before. Ignore the beard. I don't live in Brooklyn anymore. I just haven't been able to shave. Anyhow, there's a lot of people with a lot of hot takes about what we should do, what we're obligated to do, what we shouldn't do. And there's a lot of confusion, and everybody's really sure about how right they are. And who can blame them? We're always sure. So, I just wanted to explain one thing about power that it seems nobody really understands. I can't explain to you all the different groups involved in depth. And there's a lot of groups I don't even know about. But in general, the response to policing in America, like anything else, is on a spectrum. And on one extreme end, you have the people who believe there's no problem and nothing needs to be done. In fact, maybe the police should be more aggressive with us, more strict. It's really hard to understand where those people are coming from. On the other side of the spectrum, you have the police should be completely demilitarized, defunded, and then disestablished altogether. Dismantle them, dismantle the prisons, dismantle the whole thing and replace it with something more just. And then, just like any issue, there's a lot of people in between. There's a lot of conservatives that say the system is basically good, it basically works, we just need to tweak it. And there's a lot of liberals that think the system is basically good too. We just have to be nicer when we evict people and destroy their lives and fine them with speeding tickets that cost a week wage of minimum wage work. As long as we're polite, it's fine. That's the liberal mindset. There's a whole streak, a 401-year-old streak of extreme, blatant, disgusting, soul-crushing racism here. And this argument here that I'm making is not to ignore that. But that is the most common lens everyone's using to look at this issue. And it's a useful lens because that is a driving force. But there are other experts on that. I've got a lot to say about it too, but the thing I want to explain today is about power and how to deal with a leaderless movement. Because that's the main thing that I've always been hearing. From Occupy Wall Street to the Ferguson protests. What are they fighting for? What do they even want? Do they even know what they want? A friend of mine heard the Boston police say that on the scanner just the other night during some of these protests after George Floyd. So, to understand what I want to say about power, I have to do a quick thing about just the rage and the despair and the hopelessness that comes with powerlessness. And no matter what, no matter how tough we are, no matter how rich we are, no matter how confident we are, no matter how experienced we are, there comes a time when it's just us and a cop. and that cop has their hand on their gun for some fucking unimaginable reason. I can't tell you how many times the cops responded poorly to me and put their hands on their guns. And I'm just some harmless white guy, right? Harmless? Probably. Who knows? Anyway, just the intense powerlessness of looking someone in the face who can end your life in less than a few seconds, and who seems to want to end your life if you don't do everything they say. The cop mindset, no matter how good the cop is, this is what they're trained to do. They got to control the situation. That's what they're trained to do. So what they do, they get a call. Somebody usually says, black, because you have to look behind your shoulder and whisper the word black. In the Northeast, that's the polite way to say black. You'll see if you've ever been here. It's every region has their own little twist on racism, and that's the Northeast. You look behind your shoulder and whisper black, or even mouth it. So anyway, that word is like a magic spell to prime the police to know to expect trouble. You may have seen this just even in your own mind if you're honest, but among your white friends as well. They always have a story. It sounds like a crazy safari where a big scary black guy, it's a big scary black guy. If you look at it objectively, it's like some dude my size minding his own business, and your aggression towards him is what made the whole situation fucked up. That's usually it. I've seen it happen so many times. But that's another conversation. When the police get there, their training is to control the situation, control it. And a lot of cops, no offense, a lot of cops have this kind of limited intelligence, this limited patience. They're primed with fear for their lives, and they run in with this idea of controlling. And what that does for them is they run in, guns drawn or hand on the gun, maybe the baton is out, some show of force. Maybe they just have a non-lethal weapon, which I don't know if you know this, but no weapon is non-lethal. They're all potentially lethal. It's just some are less lethal. But you could kill someone with anything. A guy just got killed in prison with pepper spray. Because you just gotta, it's a question of dose. Anyway, they run in and they start shouting orders. Within seconds, they don't even know what's happening yet. And they're already making orders. And how does that make you feel? Disempowered, right? And I don't know if you're a big ISIS buff, but that was the main way ISIS did recruiting, was through the shame and hopelessness that America made them feel. You can go look up these ISIS magazines by yourself. There's articles on it. But that's a theme through history. That's how the IRA recruited. And I like to talk about the IRA because white Americans are way more sympathetic towards the IRA than they are towards the Black Panthers, even though I think they're both wonderful. They're wonderful, but what about the violence? I'm going to get to that. Don't worry. Don't worry yourself at all. I'm neither going to excuse violence or encourage it, but I'm going to explain it. And I'm going to tell you about a time I've been violent. And it's going to make sense to you because if you're honest, you're going to know about a time you've been violent. It's inevitable in all of us. So what happens when a cop runs in, starts shouting orders to control you? Well, the one thing that happens in you is this hopelessness and this rage, especially when they're wrong. You want to fucking punch them, right? But they have a gun, they have a badge, they have all of the permission in the world to be a dickhead to you, and there's nothing you could do about it. And what do they do? What do they do when they see they're wrong? They can't step it back, right? No. Because that, to them, and their cop ego, that makes them lose power and influence and face, or I don't even know if they say it that way, lose face. But they cannot step it back. They don't know how. No matter how stupid they've been, it has to escalate. They don't know any other way than escalation. And I get it, because I'm not a huge guy. And whenever I've been in a fight with somebody more powerful than myself, one tactic is to escalate it way past what the other guy was expecting. Because if you like chest bump a dude and he chest bumps you back, and you start raising your voices at each other and you escalate it bit by bit, you'll bring that other guy with you. And you guys are fighting like crazy. But if you skip several steps and you go right to like grabbing their ear and headbutting their face or grabbing their balls or any of that stuff, a lot of the times they're just not prepared to go that far, even though if you had done it the right way with this small escalation, they would have joined you there. Fight to the death. Who knows how far it goes. And that's what cops do. They love doing it because it's about control. And even when they don't love doing it, they are trained to do it. Some of the astute audience members may have noticed here that I left race out of it. Did it on purpose. Race is a fucking multiplier on this issue. What do you do? I didn't leave race all the way out of it. I just explained the cop mind without race. I did mention race in the beginning, so I guess that's called foreshadowing, right? So race is a multiplier that makes all of these issues worse because of all the preconceptions and prejudices. And there's so much literature on that, I'm not even going to talk about it. You already know. We know. We've learned it. How long have we learned it? All our lives. So why hasn't anything changed? Great question. And that's what I'm working up to with power. People are in the street right now. Right now. In most American cities. Cops only know one way to respond to people in the street. They say, clear the street. You've heard that before? I've heard it at street fairs, protests, marches, riots. You can hear it almost anywhere. Street fights. That's the first thing, that's the first tool in their toolkit. They don't care why you're there. They don't care if you're allowed to be there. They want control. That's how they wield their power. And they have the tools and the backup to do it. But what happens when you are legally in the street protesting the most traumatic thing I've ever seen? I saw a guy in real life get his head ripped off by a subway train. And the George Floyd video hurt me more than that. I can't tell you how much rage and despair I felt looking at that. I can't express it. I bit a little hole in my own face. I was so mad, and anyway, George Floyd doesn't even look at me. It is so look like me. It is so unlikely that I will meet the fate of George Floyd. But the disgust is real, and the police abuse is real, and you watch your loved one and your neighbor, and especially when it's your loved one and your neighbor who looks like you. It's the same target, the same black target. Oh, sorry, I'm in the Northeast. Black target on you that makes the police target you in the first place. It's the unimaginable grief and the rage. And all you're doing is standing out in the street saying, we don't want this. This is supposed to be a democracy, and we don't want this. And the cop mind comes to you and says, clear the street! Like, what a fucking tone-deaf piece of shit thing to say to you, right? Clear the street! Oh, and I don't even want to get into the tear gas and rubber bullets thing. You've seen it. I hope you've seen it. It's fucking awful. But that's the cop mind. They don't know another way. And now, exposition, right? So I turn back, go back towards my house here. I live in the country now. I used to live in Brooklyn. I don't know which is better. So about power. What are they asking for? What do they want? What are they protesting for? Well, that's the thing. It depends who you ask. And right now, I have to remind you about another kind of power, because it's all tied together. And it's so easy to just hear somebody talking and say, hey, you're ignoring class. Hey, you're ignoring race. Hey, you're ignoring blah, blah, blah. It's all together. It's a twisted web of horror. And I got to tell you about who owns the media real quick. A few billionaires. It's currently 4 companies own 90% of all media you ever see. Even this shit, or on Twitter, this is the emerging new media, but it's owned by billionaires, and the only reason this stuff goes through is because it suits their business model. There's no ideological commitment to free speech. Even if they say there is, that's just marketing. What billionaires want to do is filter all information and entertainment through their own personal taste a little bit, but also they just want to make sure that whatever they're doing can put eyes onto the screen that they can promise to advertisers and investors, and that's it. That's the business model. They're selling your eyes. Or in the case of Facebook and Google, they're selling all kinds of little bits and bobs about your history and your identity and stuff. But it's the same thing. That's the business model. They're selling eyes. They're selling minutes of attention. So sometimes people can get tricked into thinking Hollywood is liberal or something, because recently it's become obvious that treating races and genders and sexualities a little more equally is profitable. So they put it in the movie. But they don't put anything in that threatens them. So if you watch a lot of major coverage of issues like this, they'll usually downplay the amount of protesting. They'll usually downplay the extent of it. They'll downplay the police brutality, and they'll overdo it on the rioting and the looting. They will severely underdo it on the impassioned, honest expressions of pain and despair and rage and hopelessness. They don't want to talk about this twisted web of power. So you're going to hear a lot of things. And right now you have a hashtag sponsored by a non-profit industrial complex think tank thing. Look up that term. It's really amazing. Maybe I'll do a different video about it someday. But it's a non-profit industrial complex think tank. And they're saying they got 8 demands. You know, we're going to do body cameras. We're going to make sure that we have citizen complaint review boards. What are the other ones? I'm sorry, I have kind of a sieve, a colander for bullshit liberal reformism, because it's so meaningless in city after city. No matter what they say to massage the numbers, these programs mostly don't work. They're mostly for show, because these people, the cops and the business people that the cops serve, make no mistake, the cops' job is to protect the money and property interests of the wealthy people in your municipality or county who fund these cops. We're just an extra. There's not really a place for us in this power structure. We are victims, we are annoyances, or we are boosters who give them a free drink and say, thanks for your service, sir. Why the fuck would I call anyone sir? Feudalism is over, right? Nobody's a sir anymore. Not to me. I cannot do it. I'm too Northeast, communist, liberal, John Locke, American Revolution, blah, blah, blah. I cannot call you sir. I can't do it. It is not possible for me. And I cannot be called sir. I can't. But that's a little personal wrinkle. Maybe I'll do a video about that for you. The point is, there's only a few places for us regular people in this power structure. We are a victim of it, which is usually and grossly disproportionately black, poor, homeless, mentally ill. The intersection of all that, disproportionately, grossly, obviously, inarguably, even though people argue it, the victims of this power structure. Then we got the annoyances. It's usually like white, affluent, college-educated liberals, like going to city council meetings and say, I think you should make the handcuffs looser. Or, I think that you should lower the minimum mandatory sentences to only 10 years. And when they're in there, they should all have their own televisions. It's just bullshit like that. That's what they want. So you're a victim, an annoyance, or you're a booster, a thank you, sir, guts and glory American hero. You just love the cops. But the real power structure is the business owners and the wealthy landowners. And that's who police policy is made for. That's why quality of life offenses get people killed. The fuck does it matter if you're a little loud in the park? I mean, it's our park, theoretically. But I remember being told by a cop, get out of my park. And I'm like, holy shit, dude. It's our park. And oh boy. Because I'm white, I could be a little cheeky with them, right? It's safe. It's safer. I could be killed. I could be beaten. I could be arrested. But it's just less likely. It's disproportionately less likely I can be more cheeky than my black friends, but not around them. It's not safe to be cheeky around them. It's not right to put them in that position. I remember I was going through a period of shoplifting. You know what? The statute of limitations is gone, and I won't give details, so ha ha ha. Sorry, get me next time. But years ago, I was into shoplifting, and I saw a friend at a certain bookstore, and I had about $100 of books in my hand under some notebooks. I looked like I was just studying because I'm white and polite. I didn't even have a beard. I had a backpack and rosy red young cheeks. And I saw that friend and I said, oh, I'm glad to see you. You guys can give me good cover right now. And they said, what? And I said, oh, if I'm walking with you, nobody will even notice. And they said, what? And then we were outside and I was like, yeah, I just stole all these books. And they're like, what the fuck's wrong with you? Blah, blah, blah. Well, anyway, now I get it. Why do I got to implicate them in my crime and the response to that crime? So that is why when people are saying, hey, don't stir up shit at these protests. Don't put your black neighbors and friends through that. It's dangerous for them. But that's only one voice, and that's only one interpretation of this whole thing. There's a whole other strain of thought that says, fuck shit up, tear shit up. These cops ain't listening. And there's a whole other strain that says we have to always be peaceful no matter how many times they kick us in the nuts. And there's a whole strain of thought that says we can only do exactly what our black leadership says. But there's a paradox there because, sorry, it got dark. I'm not in control of that. black leadership is a bit of a paradox because all leadership is a bit of a paradox. It's a leaderless movement. Just imagine the white mayor of your town tells you you have to think or feel or respond a certain way. The fuck would you listen to that for if you don't agree, right? That's your freedom. As a white person, you're like, no, it's not I'm not beholden to what my dumbass mayor says. The mayor of my hometown right now is worried about the Antifa threat. And they're installing more police in the county or some shit. It's so dumb, I can't even get into it. But I'm not beholden to the stupid shit she says. That's her. I am allowed to go my own way. But this white liberal insanity that thinks black people have to be a monolith and listen to their leaders and we have to listen to their leaders. I mean, who will those leaders be? In general, right now, the leaders on the street are activists, people with a history of violence who don't get scared easy, just naturally occurring leaders because they're one person that had a good idea in the moment and the 30 people closest to them said, yeah, right on, and followed them. This is how leaderless movements work. Meanwhile, you got black leaders like Killer Mike, the landlord, right? He's a landlord, and he's telling us, ooh, don't destroy property. This is our town. And it's like, I was just reading about this. It's fresh on my mind. Home ownership is not a thing for most black people who live in Atlanta. They rent, and they work bullshit jobs there. Just like what I do here. You may have heard of some of my bullshit essential worker job stuff. So, the article I read was saying, if they burn down Atlanta, are they burning down their home or are they just burning down their plantation? It was strong words, but the white liberals can't be upset that I reposted it because I'm amplifying a black voice. They have this twisted thing where you can only have an opinion on this issue if a black person said it first, which is not such a burden as they thought, because if you actually know more than a couple black people, you'll see there's incredible intellectual and social diversity within the black community, so you can find any opinion you want there. And it's just not such a, your hands aren't tied. You don't have to listen to the one black leader like the landlord Killer Mike that they put in your face. This movement is leaderless. There are white anarchists out on the street who are facing the same oppression we all face from landlords, bosses, stockholders, all that shit. There are white socialists. There are white anarchists and socialists that are only following black leadership and only stepping up to defend them when there's a problem. And there are some that are setting out on their own. There are white nationalist, racist pieces of shit who are stirring up trouble by themselves. There are good-hearted white liberals who are taking a knee alongside everyone else in the NAACP-led afternoon marches. There's a whole variety. So what do they want? What are they protesting for? It's an impossible question because each community gets to decide that on their own. And when you're negotiating with a leaderless movement, because Americans and especially liberals don't understand power, they don't understand this, is there is no leader to ask. There's no one leader to send down the word and tell everyone what to think. There are a whole lot of reforms, and there's a whole movement to abolish the police altogether. And when you're negotiating with a leaderless movement, what you do is ask your individual community, make it open, and you start hacking away at these reforms until you hit on enough positive, concrete, achievable, meaningful reforms that you start right now that make people not want to be out on the street anymore. Because in a leaderless situation like this, there's no one else to talk to. It's us. It's the people. And as for me, personally, I would say abolish the police altogether and separate out all those jobs. I don't need the same sheriff who fucking evicted me to then show up when I've been assaulted, because I already fucking want to kill the guy who evicted me, right? That's natural. So you want to separate out some of these jobs. We have some naked guy running down the street screaming. Maybe showing up with the clear the street, patrol and control attitude is not the right attitude for helping a guy like that. Maybe you got to send somebody trained in mental health. When I worked for adults with developmental disabilities, I was the only one on staff who never got bit by one guy because I came at him different. My typical response to people in crisis is to say, "Pardon me, sorry to interrupt," high pitch, non-threatening, hands up, no gun, and I just come at them in a really non-threatening way. So maybe you need a bunch of people like that with no guns. Traffic enforcement. Is it even important? That's up to you and your community. A lot of time, it's just a revenue stream to soak the poor. It's a reverse tax. Maybe we don't need it, maybe we do. Maybe your community will decide to keep it and my community won't. It's a leaderless movement. Maybe we think investigators are good and necessary. Maybe we want to know who murdered somebody. And maybe we want to abolish quality of life crimes. Maybe we don't want gun-wielding maniacs with control issues to roam the streets and enforce every little law. Maybe we just want people in white shirts to go around being very polite and help people. There's a lot of different things we might want out of this. And in a leaderless movement, each community should have the power to try as many of them as they want. But honestly, we have a very long 401-year-old history of extreme racial oppression and violence. And if you just patch a reform together, a bullshit reform that doesn't change the meat of it, all of this will happen again. And it will have been your choice and your fault because you didn't ask for enough and you didn't push for enough and you just wanted peace right now. But don't you see how tired of that we are? Don't you see how these protests and these riots are bigger, more widespread, and more powerful than any we've seen maybe ever before? But if not, the riots from 1963 through 1969 or so, when we're doing civil rights and the end of the Vietnam War, maybe those riots are bigger. At a certain point, it's impossible to measure because the billionaire-owned media does not want to tell us the same story as people on the ground, and it's hard to put all this information together. But the point is, because we don't understand power, I gotta tell you, to negotiate with a leaderless movement means that you start making all of these reforms, a consensus amount of reforms from the community that you serve, until the people consent to those reforms. And I don't just mean the wealthy white voters and the landlords and business owners. I mean the people, including the people who often don't vote. You have to find a consensus amount of reforms that get people off the street. I won't be satisfied until there are no police. But what use am I alone if all of my community is satisfied with a few meaningful reforms? Who am I to stand against my community? It's a leaderless movement. But my suggestion to almost every municipality is to defund demilitarize, and break up those jobs so that no cop is in charge of enforcing all these different laws and responding to all these different types of events that they are not prepared for and not capable of handling well. Cops disproportionately beat their wives. Should we send these same cops on domestic violence calls? I think not. I have so much more to say about this, but I wanted people to know that with a leaderless movement, you're a fool. If you're saying, what are their demands? What do they want? Because the they is your neighbor. So ask your neighbor, form a consensus. We can't sleep this one out. We have to stay awake together. All right. Bye and thank you and I love you. Blah, blah, blah. Thanks again, everybody who watches this massive video. Thanks for walking with me.